Well, multicam editing in Descript might just be one of the more confusing, overwhelming aspects of editing in Descript. But to be fair, multicam editing in any editor is confusing and overwhelming. So I want to show you my simple steps for editing a project where I have more than one camera angle, whether it's myself and my screen that I recorded at the same time, or myself and another camera angle of myself, or myself and somebody that I have interviewed remotely. Let's start with the very basics because I have a project opened up here where I just recorded myself and my screen at the same time, which is how I usually record my YouTube videos, if you've been following along. And I actually recorded this with Ecamm, and I need to do a whole separate video or a whole separate series on Ecamm. I use Ecamm to record my videos and then edit them in Descript because it's easy to use and I can record my camera and my screen at the exact same time. I've used other recording options like Tela. I've recorded directly into Descript, and there's always just some little glitch that I have to fiddle with to edit out, and it adds extra time to my edits. Ecamm just always works. So that's my go-to right now for recording my videos, but it's not an editor. So that's why I need to bring everything into Descript. So the file that I have selected on my screen right here is a screencast recording. And then I have this file, camera A, which is my regular A-roll camera recording. Those are the only two that we're recording. And when I drag these into Descript, it's going to detect that perhaps this is a multi-track sequence or a multi-cam sequence because the timestamps are identical, because I hit record once and Ecamm recorded both of these files at the exact same time. So it's asking me if I want to combine these two files into a multi-track sequence, and I'm going to choose yes. So I want to make sure I hit the checkbox there and then done, and it's going to transcribe both of these files for me and automatically add them to the timeline. So if you already have a project open, you've already added your files to Descript and you're like, how do I make these into a multi-cam or multi-track sequence, as Descript is calling it, then just come over to your project window. You have your files in here as separate files, right? So if you just select both of them, I hit Shift on my keyboard to select both of them, it's going to give you this box here, and it's going to ask you if you want to create a sequence. And if you hit create sequence, it's going to basically wrap both of these video files into one sequence. What the heck are sequences? We're going to talk about it. Stick with me here. If you're new here, my name is Meredith. I'm here to help you look good, sound good, and feel good on camera so that you can build your thriving video brand on YouTube. And this is just one of several Descript tutorials here on my channel. I have a whole long list to publish, so make sure you hit subscribe. And if you want to grab my free Descript cheat sheet, I will link to that down in the description below this video too. So now that my videos are all transcribed, I want to come down here to the timeline. If you don't have your timeline open, open up your timeline and double click on your timeline. It's going to open up a new window within your Descript project. And this is a sequence or multi-track sequence, which means it's multiple video files wrapped up into one package, one editable package. In this case, I just have two files on here, but I could have multiple. If I was doing a podcast with like 3 other people, I would have at least 4 other tracks, if not more, with their audio and their video. The sequence is a way to take multiple tracks that are really happening at the same time and package them up. And then you figure out how all of these different tracks kind of work together in the frame, like where they go, who's on screen, which one is showing, which one is down, a little face bubble in the corner. So we'll get to that part in just a second. But first, you can see, if I zoom in here, that my audio isn't quite synced up. And the way that I recorded this with Ecamm, both my screen recording and my camera recording are tied to my microphone. So my microphone is actually coming through twice. With my eyes, I'm going to watch my lips and listen and make sure that it doesn't look like it's out of sync. Descript, if you're listening, I wish there was an easier way to do this than just eyeball it. But in this case, we're just eyeballing it. I think we're good to go. So I'm going to hit done over here. And what you're going to see in my main video window, the frame, is that on the left-hand side is the recording of my screen, and on the right-hand side is the recording of my camera. And if I hit play down here, they're both just going to play simultaneously at the same time. Now, obviously, if you have watched my tutorials on YouTube, they don't look like this, right? They don't have a black bar on top and a black bar on bottom. The video you're watching right now doesn't look like that. So what's going on? How do we make it look like you want it to look? Well, personally, I recommend you actually leave your multicam sequence separated like this while you get your rough cut in place, just to avoid the possibility of fiddling around with making everything look so perfect on the screen, only to realize that you redid this whole entire section like 5 minutes later in the video, and you need to edit out everything you just did. So go through your transcript, create a rough cut, get rid of all of the mistakes, get rid of all of the silence, and then start from the beginning by placing everything on the screen where you want it to go. But whatever you do, don't start adding scene boundaries quite yet, because it's usually a good idea, I find, to create your initial layout of how you want your video to actually appear in the frame, where you want everything to be, and then kind of work from there. So I just made my screen recording big so it fills the whole screen. I did it manually, but you could come up here to position and then fill scene editor. And then I'm going to right click, because under layer order, I want to go send to back. That way I can bring my video part up front. And I actually really like to make this a circle, and then we can actually make it smaller. And then down here under layer on the right hand side, I'm going to give it a border. We're going to give it a white border and make it a little bit thicker. Yeah, like 12. And then under, let's see, visual effects, I can give it a shadow. So we have a little bit of a shadow going on, and we'll make this nice and small down here. You can see what's happening there, right? I'm in the bubble. My screen recording is full screen. If I happen to make a cut here and say, get rid of everything before this point, it's going to do that for both of these video files, because I'm editing the sequence. I'm editing the package where the multiple tracks exist, right? If I double click on the timeline, it opens up the sequence. The sequence is still there. Everything is intact. Everything is in sync. And all I'm doing is editing the sequence on the timeline. Now, if you notice, I have a green frame around my window for my screen recording. We're going to fix that in a second to kind of polish my screen recording up a little bit. But because of the way that Descript handles their scenes, if I hit a slash on my keyboard here and add another scene to the video, this is where I would be able to change the layout on the screen to something different, right? So I could move myself to another spot. I could make this big, get rid of the shadow, get rid of the border, get rid of all of the special effects. In the timeline, as the scene switches to another scene, it's going to automatically add a smart transition down here between the two to kind of go from Meredith in a little bubble to Meredith filling out the whole entire frame, because maybe I'm just speaking to the camera for a few seconds. If I add another scene, it can go back to Meredith in a bubble again easily by selecting my first scene that I had laid out like that, hit copy layout, come to the new scene, right click, paste layout, and it's going to paste just the layout, just the placement of everything, the style of everything. So again, on the timeline, here I am in a bubble, and then I'm not in a bubble, and then I'm back to being down in a bubble again. So I'm not chopping anything up on the timeline there. I'm just adding scenes and then changing the visual layout within those scenes so that they can kind of smart transition from one to the other automatically. And it'll create this really beautiful, smooth, polished look for your video tutorials or screen recordings. And I just had an idea with this video that I'm editing right now to polish it up even perhaps a little bit more by putting a green screen border behind here. So this is just an experiment. Let's see if it works. I recorded this with a green border around here because I wanted to be able to add a branded background image to my sequence. I'm going to hit add media up here in my sequence. I already added this blue background image to my project. So this is going to be added down here on its own little track, this little itty bitty thing down here. So I want to make sure that this actually goes the full length of this video. So I'm basically just adding a new track to my multi-track sequence. The track just happens to be a still image. I'm going to hit done. And then with the scene panel selected, or the scene settings selected over here on the right, down here under layers, for whatever reason, I added it, but it's off. Like you can see the little eyeball. It's like sleeping. So I'm just going to turn that eyeball back on. We still can't see it, but that's because it's hiding under here. So let me just hit position, fill scene, and we'll put this back in place. Now there's a couple of things I wanted to try with this. I don't think they're all going to work, but with my screen recording selected with that green border, if I come down here to layer, I can go to visual effects. Now I don't want to select a green screen because green screen is going to like find my face here and then get rid of everything else. Like that's not what I'm going after. I could try chroma key, which did exactly what I wanted it to do. Let me just open up the settings here because I just want to make sure that if there's it automatically selected the green. Okay, but if there's any like green in my background or anything like that, even over here, it's probably going to try to get rid of that too. Because I think I could just crop this and not deal with the green. Plus, if I cropped it, then I could round my edges and add a border, and then I could actually, let's turn off the green. Let's add a shadow. That's kind of neat. I would want to just make sure that I save this layout exactly like this, and anytime I want my screen recording and my face in the bubble and everything, like anytime I wanted to go back to this as my default, then I would have to select my default screen recording layout. So I'll add this to my screen recording layouts template pack. And I really like how this is turning out for a screen recording tutorial style video. I'm really excited about this because this is one of several Descript tutorials that I'm adding to my channel in a long-standing series that I have here. So if you have any questions about Descript or anything you want my help with, make sure to let me know down in the comments, and then hit subscribe too so that you don't miss any of my future Descript tutorials, tips and tricks, ways to be more efficient and faster at editing with Descript. I'll probably do a whole separate video on just editing, like screen recording tutorials in Descript, but I really like the way this looks. So thanks for sticking with me through that experiment. From here, the way that I edit my screen recordings is in the places where I need to zoom in to show a little bit more detail on something. That is where I add scenes once I have my rough cut and I have removed all of the silences and everything, then I add my scenes and I break everything up so that if I am trying to point out something, specific on the screen, like these captions, for example, then with the smart transitions that are on by default, I did a whole video on that. You go back and find it. Then as I am transitioning, it automatically zooms into the section of the screen that I'm trying to focus on, and then will automatically go back. So because it's a multicam sequence, all I have to do is add my scenes to chop it up and move things around, zoom in, zoom out. All of that happens with scenes, not cutting anything. And as I edit, it's editing all of the tracks in the multi-track sequence at the same time. We still need to talk about multicam sequence with like an interview that you record remotely. I'll get to that in just a second. But I want to bring up this point of like every once in a while, you might have a video where you have two different camera angles on you or you and maybe a project that you're working on. And let me just pull up part of this lesson from inside of my YouTube Video Editing Made Easy course, because I have a specific lesson on this. And as you can see here in the lesson, it works exactly the same way that I just showed you with my face and my screen, except it's my face and my face. So if I use a phone, let's just say to record like a craft project or something, like from the top down, and then I am also recording my face, I'm bringing both of those recordings in to a sequence, line up the audio waveforms so that they're both in sync with each other. And you can use your scenes to cut back and forth between the two camera angles, or set it up so that you have one camera angle on most of the time with your face in a little bubble. It's really up to you how you want to lay it out, of course. Let's talk about a multicam sequence when you have a remote interview, for example. So in this one here, I probably recorded this with Riverside, but I'm not totally sure. So I interviewed one of my students and members of Video Brand Academy, Mimsy, for the podcast. And if I double click on my sequence down here, you can see that there's me and then there's Mimsy, right? So my audio is attached to my video here, and Mimsy's audio is attached to her video. So we just have those two tracks. This is actually a really simple edit, but with a multicam sequence, you can create a scene like this where she and I are both side by side at the same time with, a text box down here with our names and then a purple background and everything. And then I can just switch back and forth between just Mimsy or just me or both of us side by side by adding in those scenes and simply arranging what I want to have on the screen during that scene. So usually for the most part, we're side by side like this, but there are times like you can see right here, I'm looking down and taking notes. And maybe that's why I switched to just having Mimsy on the scene for a few seconds. And if you want a more step-by-step detailed tutorial on editing like an interview or a remote interview like this, let me know and I'll do one completely from scratch. But what you have here you can see in the timeline is I have this purple background down here, and then I have a rectangle behind both of us. So you can see this rectangle behind both of us that gives the effect that there's a border around both of us. There is a line between us, and then there is my name as a title and then Mimsy's name as a title. So I could just change whatever I wanted in here or, whatever I need to do there. It's just a text box. And you can see over in my scene rail over here that I start out with just me talking, and then I have a scene that is Mimsy and I, and then just Mimsy, back to Mimsy and I, then there's me, then there's both of us, and then there's me again. So those are just scenes, which are slashes in the transcript or in your timeline. And when I want something different to happen on the screen, I just create a scene, move things around, or copy a scene layout from one scene and then paste it in a new scene later on in the timeline. And I can imagine that editing multicam or multi-track videos in Descript might still be a little bit confusing and overwhelming for you. Best thing you can do is just practice. Record your screen, record your face, put them together as a multi-track sequence so that you understand the steps and how everything kind of interacts with each other in Descript. Now, as a reminder, I do have a cheat sheet down in the description below this video for Descript, and this is just one of several videos in a Descript series here on my channel. So if you want some additional tutorials, tips, how-tos, make sure you hit subscribe and let me know in the comments what you're struggling with when it comes to Descript, because maybe I'll turn your question into my next video.